So Camilla just got hit with the most devastating kind of royal reality check, and it didn't come from a tabloid or a palace leak, it came directly from beyond the grave. Because Queen Elizabeth left behind a sealed instruction that Prince William finally decided to drop on the breakfast table. And the truly brutal part, Camilla had to sit right there and listen as her entire future was carved down to ceremonial limits while Charles watched, frozen, knowing he couldn't save her from his own mother's final word. This isn't some vague palace briefing we're talking about. This is documented, private, preserved in a file that sat waiting until William decided the moment had come. And honestly, what makes this so much bigger than the usual royal drama is that it isn't about scandal in the traditional sense, it's about power, pure and simple. Who gets it, who's denied it, and who controls what happens the second Charles is no longer king. Before we get into the really uncomfortable details of that private meeting, take a second to subscribe to Prime Archive so you don't miss anything as the story keeps developing. Because trust me, the fallout is just beginning. So here's where this gets genuinely fascinating. Everyone's been focused on the surface level question of whether Camilla would ever be called queen or queen consort, or whatever careful phrasing the palace landed on that particular week. But that was never the real fight. The real fight was always about influence, about whether Camilla could shape the actual machinery of the monarchy once Charles was gone, and Queen Elizabeth apparently saw this coming from miles away. Years ago, during what was supposed to be a routine Windsor title consultation, and I need you to understand how deceptively boring that sounds, Camilla's advisors pushed for language that would edge her title closer to what's called sovereign authority. That's not ceremonial. That's not waving from balconies. That's the kind of power normally held exclusively by the monarch. And they did it after a memorial service, when emotions were raw and everyone's guard was supposedly down. The queen listened, set down her pen without finishing her note, and that tiny gesture froze the entire room. William was there, he saw it. He never forgot it. The queen didn't shout. She didn't even argue. She went colder than that, steadier than that, because she understood exactly what was being tested. If Camilla's title could be pushed beyond respect into actual authority, then the line between the woman beside the king and the crown itself would blur, and that blur would cascade directly into William and Catherine's future reign. So she acted. She privately dictated the instruction that now sits at the center of this entire crisis, defining Camilla's role as honored but limited, respected but never sovereign in reach. And here's what I find genuinely heartbreaking, even as I'm utterly fascinated by it. The file wasn't born from dislike. That's the misunderstanding Camilla will probably carry for the rest of her life. It was born from fear. Fear that during a future transition, the monarchy could confuse affection with authority, and that confusion would leave Catherine vulnerable before her time had even begun. Now fast forward to that private room where William finally confronted both his father and Camilla directly. No aides, no press secretaries softening the language. Just William standing across from the queen consort with the queen's instruction between them, while Charles sat painfully still beside his wife. The silence wasn't empty, it was crowded with decades of sacrifice, resentment, loyalty, and the one question no one dared ask out loud. Camilla looked at William and asked whether he believed she had overstepped. Her voice didn't break, but that question carried years of public judgment inside it. Years of being compared to Diana, years of being the other woman who eventually became the wife. William answered with what I can only describe as painful care. He said the instruction wasn't written to shame her, but because the queen believed boundaries were necessary. Boundaries. Not rejection, not exile, but a line drawn so clearly that even dignity couldn't cross it without consequence. Charles pushed back then. You have to understand the position he was in. He asked why his mother's instruction had to be raised now, after the family had survived so much damage, after Camilla had endured so much public punishment, after his own reign had finally begun to breathe. He wasn't defending ambition. He was defending the woman beside him. But here's where William's burden becomes visible in a way I don't think most people appreciate. William couldn't let love become law. The crown survives because personal loyalty bows before structure. And that structure matters because the future monarchy belongs to him and Catherine, not to the unresolved emotions of Charles's reign. So William read the decisive line aloud. Camilla's title must never be used to influence the position of the future queen. The future queen meant Catherine, and the instruction protected her role before any confusion could gather around it. Charles reached for the document, but William didn't hand it over immediately. That pause said more than refusal ever could. William wasn't keeping paper from his father out of pettiness. He was protecting control of the instruction itself, because whoever held it held the power to define what Camilla's title could and could not become. That hesitation revealed the deeper power struggle beneath the title. The question was no longer what Camilla could be called. It was who controlled the crown's future. And here's where the practical consequences started cutting into Camilla's daily life in ways that are genuinely brutal to track. The palace didn't announce anything publicly at first. They didn't need to. They revised schedules, removed initials from certain ceremonial programs, delayed approvals, and suddenly doors that used to open easily for Camilla required a little more clearance. She arrived expecting a scheduled briefing one morning, the kind of controlled palace discussion where duties are arranged and appearances are polished, but the room had been reduced. Her senior advisor wasn't present. The agenda had been narrowed. A member of staff, careful but shaken, told her the meeting had been moved to a smaller format. That single sentence carried the force of a public insult. Even though no public voice had spoken it, William's office called it clarification, not punishment. The prince insisted the changes reflected the boundaries left by the queen, not a personal campaign against Camilla. But palace staff understood the deeper meaning immediately. Ceremonial protocols were being adjusted wherever Camilla's title touched what's called succession imagery, the symbols, wording, and arrangements that point toward the next reign. That mattered because Catherine's future place couldn't be left vulnerable to soft language, blurred authority, or emotional pressure from the present. Charles didn't take the shift quietly. He closed the folder sharply in front of aides, and the sound cut through the room like a warning. He knew exactly what was happening. Private family pain had become administrative reality. What had begun as a sealed instruction was now reshaping calendars, briefings, programs. He could defend Camilla with love, but he couldn't easily defy the queen without weakening the very crown he had inherited from her. Camilla noticed the next blow in the ceremonial program. Her title remained there, dignified and untouched on the surface, yet the surrounding language had changed. It no longer suggested influence beyond Charles's reign. It no longer allowed anyone to confuse respect with command. Honored enough to stand beside the king, limited enough to be reminded that the future did not belong to her. That's the cruelty of the balance Queen Elizabeth constructed. And William approved the change quietly after rereading the instruction alone. He didn't look victorious, he looked burdened. Every signature pulled him further from the comfort of being a son and deeper into the lonely discipline of becoming a king. This is where the story shifts from administrative maneuvering into something much more personal and much more painful. William asked for a private conversation with Charles, no aides, no advisors, no careful palace language standing between them. Charles agreed, but not because he felt ready. He agreed because he understood that silence had already done enough damage. The instruction had moved from sealed paper into daily life, and now father and son had to face what it had done to them. Charles entered with the exhaustion of a man carrying both crown and heartbreak. He saw a framed photograph of Queen Elizabeth resting nearby, and for a moment the room seemed to belong to her more than either of them. He admitted with rare softness that he felt he was being asked to choose Camilla against his own mother. That confession hit William harder than anger would have. The prince had expected resistance. He had prepared for authority, but he had not prepared for the pain in his father's voice, the kind of pain that made every royal rule feel suddenly human. William answered carefully because one wrong phrase could reopen everything. He told Charles he wasn't trying to diminish Camilla. He was trying to protect the crown from confusion the queen had clearly feared. If Camilla's title were allowed to stretch beyond ceremony, Catherine's future place could be placed under pressure before William's reign even began. The prince needed his father to see that this wasn't revenge. It was protection. Charles finally accepted what he had avoided saying aloud. The instruction was real. It was binding. Not because it was easy and not because it spared anyone. It came from the monarch who had built the modern reign through discipline, patience, and sacrifice. The king knew he could disagree with the pain it caused, but he couldn't pretend it had no authority. William offered the only mercy he could. Camilla would be treated with dignity. Her title would remain respected, but it would not reshape Catherine's future role, and it would not blur the monarch's next chapter. Father and son reached a fragile understanding, not warm enough to heal everything, but strong enough to stop the break from becoming permanent. Charles placed the file back on the table and touched its edge as if he were saying goodbye to a battle he could no longer win. He had defended Camilla with loyalty. He had carried her through storms that would have broken weaker hearts. But love could explain his resistance, it just couldn't erase his mother's instruction. The monarch had spent a lifetime teaching the family that duty came first, and now that lesson had returned to him in the hardest possible form. And then the story broke publicly, because of course it did. A major newspaper carried the story under the headline, "The Queen's Final Line," with William, Charles, and Camilla placed beneath those 5 words. Those words struck hard because they made the crisis simple. The Queen had drawn a boundary, William had revealed it, Charles had accepted it, and Camilla now had to live within it. Broadcasters seized on the meaning immediately, framing the revelation as a historic clarification of Camilla's role, not as a removal, but as a limit that changed the emotional balance of the entire reign. That mattered because the public had always understood royal titles as symbols of honor, yet this story showed they were also tools of power. A title could open doors, shape access, and influence how the future was prepared. Now, viewers were being told that the late monarch had guarded that future even from beyond her reign, and William had become the one forced to carry out her final line. Camilla felt the public weight before the palace finished its response. She saw the front page at breakfast, folded the paper once, and left it beside her plate without finishing her tea. She didn't need anyone to explain the humiliation. Her title remained respected, but the nation had now seen the boundary around it. The private wound had become a public shape. For Charles, that was another blow. The king had tried to protect her from being reduced to a controversy, yet the very instruction that preserved the crown had exposed her pain to the entire country. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered in uneasy silence. Some came out of loyalty to the Queen's memory, some came because they sensed history shifting in real time. One elderly woman spoke a phrase that cut through the noise. The Queen knew what had to be protected. It was simple, but it carried the mood of the morning. People weren't just reacting to Camilla. They were reacting to William, to Catherine, to Charles, and to the future monarchy suddenly made visible through one old instruction. Palace officials released carefully controlled language, affirming respect for Camilla while confirming that future precedents would follow the Queen's instruction. Precedents, the order of rank and importance in royal life, had now been publicly tied to Catherine's future role. Commentators understood the deeper shock immediately. Catherine had not fought for protection. The late monarch had provided it. William had only revealed what had already been decided. And what strikes me as the most telling detail in this entire saga is how Catherine herself responded. Away from the pressure of that room, she set down a cup of tea untouched, genuinely shaken by the knowledge that her future role was being defended through conflict. She didn't seek a battle with Camilla. She didn't need one, yet the Queen's words had placed her at the center of a struggle she had tried so carefully to avoid. Now let me pull back and explain why this entire situation was basically inevitable from the moment that Old Windsor title consultation went sideways. A title consultation is exactly what it sounds like. A private discussion about how royal names, ranks, and ceremonial roles should be used in official life. And this particular one took place after a memorial service when emotions were already raw. Camilla's advisors pressed for language that would move her title closer to sovereign authority, meaning closer to the kind of power normally held by the monarch alone. They used a specific phrase, shared royal authority. Charles, still then a son under his mother's reign, knew instantly those words had gone too far. He tried to pull the room back towards ceremony, but the monarch had already heard the warning hidden beneath the polish. She wasn't angry in a loud way. She was colder than that, steadier than that, because she understood what was being tested. If Camilla's title could be pushed beyond respect and into authority, then the future line of the crown could one day become clouded by emotion, loyalty, and competing claims of influence. The queen acted after that consultation ended. She privately dictated the instruction that now stands at the center of everything. And here's what the family only discovered when a senior aide moved a sealed envelope across the table during that confrontation. The file contained more than one page, and the next page didn't point forward. It pointed back. The deeper they looked into the queen's reasoning, the clearer it became that this one forgotten moment had started the entire crisis. Every royal crisis has a moment that later looks small until history turns back and points directly at it. For Queen Elizabeth, that moment was the consultation where shared royal authority was first whispered into the room. William understood why the sealed page felt heavier than the folder that held it. The prince had seen enough royal storms to know that true danger rarely began with shouting. It began with careful words, softened phrases, and quiet pressure placed where no one outside the palace could hear it. That was what made the old Windsor title consultation so dangerous. It stayed hidden, hardened, and waited. Certain palace offices had known enough to stay quiet over the years. They had avoided discussing the instruction because no one wanted to force Charles into choosing between the woman beside him and the mother who had ruled before him. That avoidance protected peace for a time, but it also allowed uncertainty to grow. Now, ceremonial decisions involving Camilla faced tighter review whenever they touched succession symbolism, future precedents, or Catherine's coming role. Camilla feels those changes before the public understands them. She still has honor, but honor now comes with limits. Camilla's pain surfaced in the smallest way during that initial confrontation. She gripped the edge of her chair, not dramatically, not loudly, but tightly enough for Catherine to notice. The queen consort understood the message behind the polished language. Respect was not the same as control. She could stand beside Charles, share ceremonies, and carry dignity in public. Yet the queen's instruction placed a wall between her role and the future monarchy. That wall was invisible to the crowd outside, but inside the palace, everyone could feel it rising. Catherine watched William with quiet concern, knowing his calm voice was costing him more than anyone admitted. Challenging Charles's household meant stepping into a family wound that had never fully healed. And the future queen understood why William had delayed this moment for as long as possible. Still, the instructions showed that Queen Elizabeth had seen this danger long before the family was willing to name it. She had not acted from panic, she had acted from foresight. What makes this entire situation so fundamentally different from previous royal scandals is that it's not about misbehavior, or leaked tapes, or embarrassing photographs. It's about the cold, deliberate architecture of the monarchy itself. Titles are never just names. They decide access, precedence, influence, and memory. The queen understood that better than anyone. So when her final instructions surfaced, it didn't merely wound Camilla's pride. It exposed the machinery beneath the velvet. Who could sign, who could advise, who could enter the room. And who had the right to shape what came next? William understood this was the part no one wanted spoken aloud. Camilla's title still carried ceremony, respect, and public dignity. But the instructions separated symbolism from governing influence. Ceremony meant the public duties, greetings, appearances, and honors that surround royal life. Influence meant something far more dangerous, the power to shape decisions, guide access, and affect how the next reign would be prepared. The prince knew that difference mattered because the monarchy could survive discomfort, but it could not survive blurred authority at the very top. Charles stared at the wording as if every line had been written against his heart. The king had spent years proving that Camilla belonged beside him, and now he was being forced to accept that belonging did not mean unlimited reach. A senior courtier noticed how long he looked at the page without turning it. That silence told the room everything. Charles was not only reading his mother's limit on Camilla, he was absorbing the fact that the late monarch had planned for a future where his love could not be allowed to reshape the crown. The king later admitted during that private conversation with William that he felt he was being asked to choose between the woman he loved and the mother who had shaped his entire life. The confession landed with brutal weight because it stripped away the titles and revealed the human being underneath. A son still grieving, still seeking approval, still caught between devotion and duty. Camilla felt the ending in silence. She didn't explode, didn't demand another hearing, and didn't try to turn dignity into defiance. She stood alone after the door closed, wounded by the knowledge that her title remained honored but carefully contained. A royal title can bring respect, ceremony, and public grace, but it cannot automatically bring ultimate power. Camilla knew now that acceptance was the only way to keep the dignity she still had. Catherine's future position stood protected, not through palace rivalry, but through the Queen's last deliberate act of judgment. William had revealed what the monarch had left behind, and Catherine's place beside him was no longer vulnerable to blurred language or private pressure. That's the revelation beneath the scandal. Camilla could stand beside Charles, but she could not redefine what came after him. And that brings us to the final, unshakable meaning of this entire crisis. The Queen's last instruction did not erase Camilla, did not humiliate Charles, and did not crown William early. It did something colder, wiser, and more permanent. It drew a line between affection and authority, between title and power, between the woman beside the king and the future waiting beyond his reign. William hadn't stepped forward as a rebel son trying to overpower his father. He had stepped forward as the guardian of a boundary the late monarch believed the crown needed. The crown, in plain terms, isn't just the physical object placed on a sovereign's head. It's the continuing authority, duty, and trust that passes from one reign to the next. That's why this moment mattered. It protected the future from confusion, and it forced the present to accept limits. Charles accepted the decision without another argument. He had defended Camilla with loyalty, carried her through storms that would have broken weaker hearts, but now he understood the painful truth. Love could explain his resistance, but it could not erase his mother's instruction. The monarch had spent a lifetime teaching the family that duty came first, and now that lesson had returned to him in the hardest possible form. Camilla sat frozen as the meaning settled around her. Her title wasn't being stripped away, her dignity wasn't being publicly erased, but its power was being defined, and that definition was devastating. Precedence, the order that decides who stands where, speaks when, and represents what inside royal life, now mattered more than ever. This touched ceremonial control, future transitions, and Camilla's place beside the crown when William and Catherine's future came into view. William closed the folder slowly, and the sound seemed to end one era before the next had even begun. The prince said the instruction had been known only to a narrow circle because no one wanted to force the family into this reckoning too soon. Then he added that there was one more person who had to hear the Queen's words directly, without protection, delay, or careful palace language. That person was Camilla herself. And she heard them. She understood that the Queen's final instruction had crossed from private inheritance into public judgment, and that one front page had turned the entire crisis into a national image, the Queen's final line. Those 5 words made everything simple. The Queen had drawn a boundary, William had revealed it, Charles had accepted it, and Camilla now had to live within it. This moment meant that Queen Elizabeth's reign still shapes the monarchy after her death. William proved he would defend its future. Charles paid the emotional price of loyalty. Camilla learned that honor without ultimate authority was still honor, but never command. This was the final meaning of the Queen's instruction. The crown could show mercy, affection, and respect, but when the future of the monarchy was at stake, duty had the last word.